Last week, we told you how the Senate voted to delay Kash Patel's confirmation hearing and that the Democrats are going to use that time to dig up dirt on Patel. Well, now we get a report from the Washington Post that claims that Patel was paid $25,000 by a Russian filmmaker with ties to the Kremlin. Patel is also under fire for his business ties to Shein. It's a Chinese fashion realtor, and they're accused of using slave labor. Now, here to break all this down for us is J. Michael Waller. He's a senior analyst for the strategy at the Center for Security Policy. So, J. Michael, thanks so much for joining us again. We all knew that they were going to try and go after Kash Patel. So now, what's your take on all of these accusations that we just so suddenly have found?
Yeah, it's a question of all these crack journalists at the Washington Post finding easily available information that was already disclosed to the Senate Judiciary Committee and to the Justice Department ethics, and making a big scandal that it's too late for people to really follow up on. The vote on Kash is the first one in the Senate, I think, takes place Thursday. So this is just your typical what you'd expect of an October surprise before an election.
Yeah, what strikes me about this is what's hilarious about this is that there's so much Chinese money flowing into Washington, D.C. and every politician and every politico known to man that it's not even considered corruption, right? Normally. I mean, tons of Chinese money. It's okay if the Russians give $80 million to the Clintons, right? That's fine. But we're going to talk about a $25,000 thing for a TV series. Do you think this stuff has legs, though? I mean, this is their plan. They were going to gunk up the works and throw a bunch of this stuff into the mix, and they'll continue to do so right up until the vote. Do you think it's sticking or no?
Not yet. You never know, because it's going to be a close vote given certain members of Congress. But the fact is, this information was already raised before the Judiciary Committee. Any concerns were either, handled, in person with the senators or during Kash's hearings. So a $25,000 payment to participate in a film program is really not a big deal, especially this individual involved. He's being labeled as a Russian. Well, he's a Ukrainian citizen who's a dual national of Russia who became a naturalized American. So he's an American of Russian and Ukrainian background and citizenship. So you really don't know, this is not really revealed in the headlines that we're reading.
Yeah, that sounds awful discriminatory and closed-minded, not to call him an American in some fashion. I want to switch gears real quick, because something that's really important that you've been discussing on X and elsewhere is USAID. I mean, so here's a program that's been around for a while, and I really wanted you to share with our audience your expertise on this, because you were involved in the 90s, right, and seeing the problems with this organization. And I think it's important that people understand that history and how it metastasized into what it is today, given that there's so much misinformation about it now as the left tries to strike back.
Well, USAID was created by President Kennedy in an executive order that made it a tool of American foreign policy to combat Russian or Soviet communist subversion worldwide. And it was always supposed to have been that way. And then the Cold War dissolves, and USAID is trying to find a new reason of existence. What happened was it became, when it lost its sense of mission and lost its focus, it started looking for new functions. And in looking for new functions, it brought on more and more and more contractors, and it became an entity of its own. When I first subcontracted with USAID in the late 80s, very early 90s, I was working to train the former Contras in Nicaragua in political organization and political communication so they could set up their own opposition party against the communist Sandinista regime. They were doing it as an instrument of U.S. foreign policy, but they were so strict with their rules on neutrality, they forbade me to say that the communists were bad. Now, it was all understood, but that was one of the rules. I cannot criticize any political party in the country where this program is going on. So they were that narrow in being apolitical, which I think was sort of went over the top, but it was still useful. That went out the window. So when I was a subcontractor for a little while in Russia, right after the Soviet collapse, I was trying to set up a Frank Church-style committee that the Senate had right in the mid-1970s to investigate the CIA, and a counterpart committee in the House to investigate the FBI really thoroughly. And this was a committee that I helped set up in the Russian State Duma, which was then very pro-American, to have oversight of the former KGB and rip it out by the roots and expose everything and tear up the networks and everything else. USAID refused to support that policy, even though a lot of Russian lawmakers of various political parties wanted to do it, as well as anti-communist dissidents and Russian journalists who were on our side and so forth. It later turned out, the former dissidents told me they recognized the USAID person, a Russian lawyer, who they remembered being a judge in the KGB secret tribunals who sent them off to the Gulag.
These stories are just incredible. But I want to go back to having known USAID since 1980s, right? What have you made of the last 2 weeks of all of the headlines, of everything coming out, the way that it is starting to be peeled back one layer of the onion at a time?
Yeah. I never wanted anything to do with them after the mid-90s when I saw they were becoming a club of friends and cronies in the Washington Beltway area and all their friends around the country and around the world. And then you had people in USAID making a top government salaries, leaving to become top contractors with USAID and getting paid a ton more money. So it became this sense of careerism where you work your way to the top in order to become a contractor. And you leave now your, say, $150,000 a year job to become a contractor for $250,000 a year. And then if you start up your own contracting company with USAID, you're allowed to make a 10% profit on top of the gross value of the contract. And the federal law allows CEOs of government contractors to make up to $660,000 a year salary. So if you're paying yourself as a CEO, you get your CEO salary plus all of that profit margin, so you can become a millionaire in very short time.
Well, let's talk about something very important that we've spoken about before, but is now actually rolling forth, and that's President Trump announcing that he's going to be rooting out all these woke ideologies from the military academies. What do you think? What does this mean? You know, when people say, "Oh, he's going to uproot," as our headline says here, woke leftist ideologues from the military. What specifically are we talking about? What needs to be done at these institutions?
A lot. Remember the military academies, and then the command and general staff colleges that train our officers to become commanders and members of the work on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and other military schools. These are properties of the American taxpayer, so they're not like a university where there's free inquiry for academia and professors can say what they want. What has happened over time, it's really since the Obama administration, was these even a bit before then actually was that these academies became more and more left wing, where there was no sense of balance anymore, no pretense of balance anymore, to the point where, starting under Obama, they were actively pushing DEI and critical theory in their curriculum.
Well, we saw in December that they had their best December in 15 years. Of course, we know that they're trying to make up for a 41,000 recruitment deficit from the previous year. So how far do you think that they can go in making a big change just in this calendar year alone?
Oh, I think quite a bit. I know a lot of kids. I mean, my son dropped out of the Army because he thought it was a do-nothing Army, and his unit was, in his words, only as good as the fattest girl in the unit. So when you have an Army that's lowered its standard that way, your warrior class of people won't want to sign up. So look at the brand new recruitment ads that are coming out. They're really great. They're really, highly motivating. They're really energizing. So I think that with the changes underway, we'll see a big boost in military recruitment and a big boost in the quality of the recruits.
Yeah, well, we had the good Dr. Wadinsky on here who worked in the DOD for a while, talking about going to West Point, for instance, to try to straighten it out and realizing, there's a lot more to do. I don't know how many Americans, myself included, would love for West Point to become a place where I want to send my son. But as you say, and as someone who's been in the academy, to really root that out, which is possible, I think, in the military academies, if you really had the will, because they do have control, you have to do a lot, and you have to get rid of a lot of personnel. Personnel is policy. Thanks for coming on today. It's good.
Good to be with you.
J. Michael Waller, thanks so much as always. We'll see you next time.
See you then.
MP, when we look at this, again, it's military readiness, it's the actual recruitment of the kids. There are so many different facets of this military preparedness that they still need to go and tackle.
Yeah, look, Hegseth and others have said it's going to take a long time to get these institutions in shape. I believe he said, like the Air Force, for instance, they're so messed up, it's going to take 7-8 years. I mean, people who are serious about reform understand the institutions themselves have a long way to go, but they're committed to doing that. But the first step is exactly to get people to want to come back because they realize that the leadership, I mean, look, people want to serve their country. So many good people, good-hearted Americans want to serve, and that's been taken away from them because they see this terrible leadership. Now they see a glimmer of hope, and you see people signing up. But the reality is, as Waller reminds us, this is a long haul, and it's going to take getting rid of a lot of people to actually reform them. You're talking about places that are woke in ways you don't even want to imagine, but we have to go in and do the work.